Okay, I just finished listening to Bare Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. So I really got into the book in the beginning. I just started listening to it without knowing that much. I've never listened or read anything by V.E. Schwab, but it kind of looked interesting. I thought it was going to be witchy. It ended up being sort of like more vampire oriented. Really cool in the sense that it's like a queer story centering around, three women who I guess you could say kind of like are intertwined romantically, but it spreads through like 500 years, which kind of like is one of the things I actually don't like that much about it because I feel like, I would have rather liked to have stayed in maybe two or three different settings rather than sort of like some chapters are like 10 years and it's like, do I really need to know what happened in these 10 years? Maybe not really. But really interesting story. What I liked about the Maria character who becomes Sabine is that she's kind of like a protagonist who's also like evil. And so in that sense, I found it really entertaining throughout the beginning of the book. I would say Charlotte, who's like the second main character, is interesting. We do get a little bit of her like origin story and like before she gets turned and all of that stuff. But she's a little bit more like whiny and not so much, very like moralistic, which I think when someone's becoming a vampire, like you don't really want them to be like super moralistic and, existential about the experience. I feel like Maria and Sabine's character is just like, tears up everything in their sight, which again, like when you're thinking of a vampire story, I think is more relevant. And my only criticism would be, particularly in the audiobook, the accents is just too much for me. If I'm listening to an audiobook, I would prefer just having one narration and one accent throughout because it did throw me off. And the Alice character particularly, I didn't really gel with because I feel like she was introduced so minimally in the beginning of the story with as a complete non sequitur because she doesn't get actually incorporated in until later. So that was my other thing. Like I actually stopped this book 2/3 of the way through and I listened to all of 1/5 Avenue by Candace Bushnell before returning to this because between the accents of the narration and the fact that, Alice I didn't really connect that much with and Charlotte sort of started becoming a little bit too much of a crybaby. I was like, I want like a scorched earth, vibe throughout this whole thing. But I would say that Sabine's was sort of a mainstay throughout the whole thing, just being reckless and evil, which again, I mean, I think that's what we're here for when we are into like a vampire story, even though I didn't even know this was a vampire story going into it. But still, I mean, if you're into like fantasy and like, vampires and lesbians, highly recommend.